Savannah Guthrie's mother, Nancy Guthrie, missing day 48. This, as we learn, that construction site dumps are being searched. For what? We also learn more about the process that Nanos and the FBI is employing to get a DNA match. Is it possible? Also tonight, careful analysis of blood on Nancy Guthrie's porch is telling us a very different story. Good evening. I'm Nancy Grace. This is Crime Stories. I want to thank you for being with us. Pima County Sheriff's is asking now for footage of vehicles in the neighborhood. A white vehicle seen in the maze of streets surrounding Nancy's home.
Because if they can tie that back to a suspect here, this is going to be critical moving forward with the case specifically.
To whoever has her or knows where she is, that it's never too late. And you're not lost or alone. And it is never too late to do the right thing. And we are here. And we believe. And we believe in the essential goodness.
Straight out to Dave Mack, Crime Stories investigative reporter. We know that the feds are now trying to question work crews on a construction site, one in particular, and maybe more in Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood. We now know that dump sites used by construction crews are being searched. What do you know? What can you tell me?
We know that the investigation has really gotten into these construction sites, Nancy, to identify all personnel, including daily contractors who have come in. They're trying to identify not just people, but you mentioned the trash. They're trying to determine where trash is being taken. Where are the dump sites for these individual homes that are being under construction? Is there one place in particular that it's being taken, or are there multiple? They're identifying places that they can look into dump sites from the construction sites.
Okay, that is a very, very difficult task. I have worked on dump site searches. You have to break it down into grid searches. It's really, really hard to do. With me, Professor of Forensics, Jacksonville State University, Joseph Scott Morgan, author of Blood Beneath My Feet on Amazon and star of a hit podcast, Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan, but more important, death investigator with over 10,000 death inquiries under his belt. A dump site, grid search. I'm not saying we're looking for Nancy Guthrie's body. That's not what I'm saying. I think they're looking for something else. How do you go about a grid search if they are looking at construction crew dump sites?
Okay, understand this. When you're talking about searching any kind of landfill, all right, and it all works on the same principle, whether it's household debris or whether it is construction. People just don't go in there and randomly dump stuff. They do have the thing broken up into grids. And Nancy, here's something else. And this is always a clue that we look for when we're searching these kinds of locations. Did you know that those grids have specific dates? Like when these things would have been picked up, where they were deposited, because you cannot continue to deposit things in the same location over and over again. It has to be organized in order to facilitate this. The one difficult part that I have always found in any of these things I've ever searched is that you have equipment that runs over the stuff to kind of pack it down, and that creates an absolute nightmare for investigators when they go out there to begin to search.
Well, there's all sorts of issues with a construction site search. I'm curious about what they could be looking for. When you hear a search of a dump or a landfill, you immediately think they're looking for a body. That is not necessarily true. Joe Scott.
No, it's not. And, listen, if somebody has been involved in some kind of nefarious activity and they have one of these big dumpsters, all right, that you see at construction sites, and they're putting things in there specifically. And look, it could be biological material, something organic that's going to break down. That's one of the problems that you run into with these sites, is because this is an aerobic environment, which means it's oxygenated. And that means that anything that's in there that is organic breaks down very, very quickly, and it compromises evidence. But if there's other things, say for instance, if there's any kind of tools, any bits of wood that may have been associated with something that was involved in a crime, that's going to be there as well. And here's one of the problems that you run into. It's something called co-mingling. So you get evidence that's kind of tied up together, and it can come from other sites, because on the day that a specific grid has stuff dumped from location A and B and C, you're confined to that spot, but that stuff gets commingled, mashed down, and kind of turned around.
Nancy Grace revealed the truth, flushed face. Blood on Nancy Guthrie's porch changes everything. It wasn't the disappearance that changed the case. It was the blood. When Nancy Grace looked at the latest findings, her tone shifted immediately. Because what was discovered on Nancy Guthrie's porch didn't match the story people had been believing from the start. Before we go any further, Crime Talk, I want to hear from you. Drop where you're watching from in the comments, and make sure you subscribe if you're following real cases like this, because this one just took a serious turn. For days, investigators treated Nancy Guthrie's disappearance like a mystery with too many missing pieces. There were no clear signs of forced entry, no obvious struggle, nothing that clearly pointed to what happened in those final moments. But the porch told a different story. At first, it didn't look like much, just a small area easy to overlook. But once forensic teams went back and processed it properly, they found traces of blood, subtle, not immediately visible, but there. And that changed everything. Because that blood wasn't where it should have been if Nancy had simply left on her own. It was found in a pattern that suggested movement, not just a drop, not accidental, but spread in a way that raised questions. Questions investigators couldn't ignore. Nancy Grace focused on one key detail: the location. The blood was near the entrance, close enough to suggest that whatever happened, it started right there. Not inside the house, not somewhere far away. Right at the point where someone would either be arriving or leaving. That detail alone created a problem with the original timeline. Because if Nancy had walked out willingly, calmly, without incident, why was there blood? And more importantly, whose blood was it? Testing became the priority. Investigators needed to know whether it belonged to Nancy or someone else entirely. Because if it wasn't hers, then the situation became even more serious. It meant she wasn't alone. Nancy Grace didn't hold back. This, she said, is the kind of evidence that doesn't just raise questions, it demands answers. And the more they analyzed it, the clearer it became. The porch wasn't just a place she passed through. It may have been the last place something went very wrong. The results from the blood analysis didn't come back quietly. They shifted the entire direction of the case. Nancy Grace made it clear. This wasn't just a trace amount of blood that could be brushed off or explained away. It was enough to confirm that something had happened on that porch, and it wasn't minor. When the lab results came in, investigators focused on one critical question first. Was the blood Nancy Guthrie? The answer mattered more than anything. Because if it was hers, it meant she had been injured right there at the entrance of her own home. But if it wasn't, then someone else had been involved, and possibly hurt. What they found made the situation even more complicated. The blood was consistent with Nancy's DNA, but not entirely. There were indications of a mixed sample, not strong enough at first to immediately identify a second person, but enough to suggest that Nancy may not have been alone in that moment. That detail alone changed everything. Now, investigators weren't just looking at a disappearance. They were looking at a possible confrontation. Nancy Grace pointed out something most people didn't think about: the pattern of the blood. It wasn't scattered randomly. It showed signs of movement, like someone had shifted position or been moved. Not a large-scale struggle, but not accidental either. And then came another detail. There were no visible attempts to clean the area. That raised a serious question. Why would someone leave behind evidence like that unless they didn't have time or didn't expect it to be noticed? Because remember, the blood wasn't obvious at first glance. It took proper forensic processing to even see it clearly. Which suggests something important. Whoever was there may have believed they got away clean. Nancy Grace leaned into that point. "This isn't panic," she explained. "This looks controlled, quick but controlled." That idea started connecting back to the earlier timeline. The unknown phone calls, the presence near the home, the unexplained gaps in Nancy's final hours. It all began to line up. If Nancy had been in contact with someone in the days before she vanished, and that same person showed up near her home, then the porch may have been where that meeting turned into something else. Something that wasn't supposed to happen. Or something that was. By the end of the analysis, investigators were no longer asking if something occurred on that porch. They were asking what exactly happened and who was standing there with her when it did. If you're following this closely, drop where you're watching from and tell me what you think. Was this planned, or did something go wrong in the moment? As the investigation continued, everything kept circling back to one place: the porch. Nancy Grace emphasized that once the blood evidence was confirmed, the case was no longer just about a missing person. It had shifted into something far more serious. The analysis showed that the blood likely belonged to Nancy Guthrie, but there were also signs suggesting she may not have been alone. That detail pushed investigators to re-examine everything: her calls, her movements, and the people she had contact with in the days before she vanished. That's when the earlier timeline became critical again. The unknown phone number she had been communicating with just days before her disappearance suddenly took on new importance. Investigators connected that contact to activity near her home around the same time. The blood evidence suggests something happened on the porch. Now the pieces started to fit together. The communication wasn't random. It may have led to a meeting, and that meeting may have happened right there at her front door. There were no clear signs of forced entry, which suggested Nancy may have opened the door willingly. That detail aligned with the idea that she either knew the person or at least didn't see them as an immediate threat. But something changed in that moment. The blood pattern indicated movement, possibly a brief struggle or an injury that occurred quickly. It didn't look like a prolonged incident. It looked controlled, fast, and deliberate. After that, everything went silent. No more phone activity, no confirmed sightings, no clear trail. The person connected to that earlier communication became a central focus, especially after investigators found behavior suggesting planning, short-term phone use, limited traceability, and timing that matched Nancy's final known moments. What stood out most was how quickly everything ended. The contact began days earlier. The presence was confirmed near her home. And then, after the night the blood was left behind, both Nancy and any clear leads seemed to disappear at the same time. That's what makes this case so unsettling. Because the porch doesn't just suggest something happened. It suggests that whatever happened was meant to be quick, controlled, and difficult to trace. Nancy Guthrie still hasn't been found. And while investigators are closer than before, the truth remains just out of reach. But one thing is clear. The blood on that porch didn't just raise questions. It revealed that the moment Nancy disappeared, may have started right at her own front door. If you've been following this case, drop where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe, because stories like this don't stay hidden forever.
A, there was never proof of life ever presented. B, they never contacted the family directly, as Fitz just told you. But Scott Eicher, another issue I have is the delay, because obviously this is not a burglary, this is not a robbery. None of that happened. When you go in to commit a burglary, you don't go, "Oh my stars, there's somebody home. I think I'll take her with me." No, that's not how it works. So obviously, one of the only choices left is ransom. But typically, ransom requests happen immediately, so the victim's family can get the money together and start the negotiation. There was never a negotiation. All there was a Bitcoin manner of payment. And without any proof of life and with the delay in submitting the ransom, I just don't believe it was valid.
I totally agree. And that last point you made, that it needs to be immediate after the kidnapping and directly to the family, I think are some of the most important parts of it. I mean, proof of life, that's obviously something that Savannah initially wanted. But if you remember in some of the later videos, she was just kind of more leaning towards, hey, we want our mom back, whatever condition she's in. Either way, I think the law enforcement, the FBI, and the sheriff's office evaluated those with the behavioral analysis unit, analyzing the wording, analyzing whether it's real or not. And I don't think any of it was real. I don't think the ransom was paid, and that's why we still are in this type of situation and have nothing to go on at this point.
Also tonight, I want to look at the security door on Nancy Guthrie's front porch. Let's see that. Now, according to a neighbor, this was practically burglar proof. What about it, Dave Mack?
You're exactly right, Nancy. A neighbor came forward to say they have the same security door and they are impenetrable. You cannot break in through the front door with that security door there. That was what she said, hey, that there's no way anybody got through that front door.
I don't know if I agree with that. Could it be subjected to a lockpick, Joe Scott? Would that work? I mean, I'm not saying break the door down. I'm saying a lockpick.
Yeah, but okay, here's the deal, particularly with tool marks. If you look at that deadbolt that's at the top, hopefully they've documented that very, very well. If they suspected that, you could see pick marks there. And also you would look for any other tool marks. That's a great shot right there. Do you see that guard that's on the right? One of the things here, when you think about the preventative nature of this, can a pry bar defeat that? I would say probably not, without raising a huge ruckus in this area. And just looking at that, it doesn't look like there's any kind of insult to that margin there. But the lock themselves, I suppose if somebody was skilled enough, they could probably pick it, but it would take some time to do that, Nancy.
Guys, if you know or think you know anything about the disappearance of Mrs. Guthrie, please dial toll-free 800-225-5324. Or if you wish to remain anonymous, 520-882-7463. There is a $1.2+ million reward. Thank you to our guests, but especially to you for being with us tonight. Nancy Gray signing off for tonight, but I'll see you tomorrow night. And until then, good night, friend.